The grandchildren of Empress Elisabeth. Lives of love, loss, and rebellion. Empress Elisabeth, immortalized as Sisi, had numerous grandchildren, yet their stories remain largely unknown. Their lives could hardly have been more different. Some found quiet family happiness, others lost their parents in childhood, broke with centuries-old traditions, or ignited major scandals. Behind each name lies a deeply personal fate marked by hope, tragedy, and the courage to forge a new path at the twilight of an empire. Gisela's new life in Munich. In the spring of 1873, the Viennese court celebrated a splendid wedding. Archduchess Gisela, the 16-year-old eldest daughter of Emperor Franz Joseph and Empress Elisabeth, married Prince Leopold of Bavaria. For Gisela, the ceremony was not just a union of two noble houses. It was the start of a completely new chapter. She left her native Vienna and settled in Munich as a princess of Bavaria. While many expected her to struggle with leaving her family, Gisela saw the move above all as a chance for a fresh beginning. At the Viennese court, she had grown up largely in the care of governesses, often missing the presence of her restless mother. Now she made a quiet but resolute decision. Her own children would experience a different childhood. She would not simply be a mother. She would be present. Life soon blossomed at the Palais Leopold. On January 8, 1874, Gisela gave birth to Elisabeth Marie, making Emperor Franz Joseph and Empress Elisabeth grandparents for the first time. A little over a year later, Auguste Maria Louise followed. In 1880 came a son, George, and on November 22, 1883, Conrad, the youngest, was born. The palace filled with the sound of children's laughter. Governesses did assist with their education, but Gisela deliberately refused to fade into the background. She spent hours playing with her children, sharing in their daily lives, and offering them the warmth and closeness she herself had so often lacked. For a few precious years, her dream of a close-knit family came true. While Prince Leopold devoted himself to his military duties, Gisela managed the household, pursued charitable work, and nurtured her private passions for painting and poetry. Above all, she created a home defined by affection and togetherness. The four siblings developed distinct personalities. Elisabeth Marie was self-confident and strong-willed. Auguste, warm-hearted and caring. George, marked by a pronounced sense of discipline. And the baby of the family, Conrad, who received special attention. Yet no one could foresee how soon this harmony would be challenged. One daughter would secretly marry for love, presenting the court with a fait accompli, and one of the sons would turn his back entirely on aristocratic life to become a priest. The Mayerling tragedy and Little Ötzi. While Gisela built her new life in Munich, a deep crisis was consuming her brother Rudolph's family in Vienna. On September 2, 1883, at Laxenburg Castle, Crown Prince Rudolph and Crown Princess Stephanie welcomed their only child, a daughter named Elisabeth Marie. Within the family, she was affectionately called Ötzi, the Hungarian form of Elizabeth. For Stephanie, the birth sparked hope that a child might mend a strained marriage. Rudolph would have preferred a son and heir to the throne, but he quickly grew deeply attached to his spirited little girl. That fragile family happiness lasted only a few short years. On January 30, 1889, the Mayerling tragedy shattered the monarchy. Crown Prince Rudolph and Mary Vetzera were found dead. For Franz Joseph and Elizabeth, the loss of their only son was an unimaginable blow. For Gisela and Marie Valerie, it was the loss of a beloved brother. But no one felt the aftershocks as directly as 5-year-old Ötzi. That winter day had begun like any other, but then everything changed. Adults whispered in hushed tones, servants hurried through the corridors, and the carefree atmosphere of the castle simply vanished. Eventually, her mother and governess knelt beside her to explain that her father would never come home again. Ötzi listened silently. At 5, she could not fully grasp the finality of death, but she understood immediately that her adored father was gone forever. In his farewell letter, Rudolph had urged his wife to care for their daughter, calling her the most precious thing he left behind. After Rudolph's death, Emperor Franz Joseph took guardianship of his granddaughter. Ötzi quickly became his undisputed favorite. Whenever duties allowed, the emperor spent time with her, indulged her wishes, and ensured her childhood was as carefree as possible. Tuition, riding lessons, and her great love of dogs were meant to distract her from grief. Throughout her life, Erzi kept numerous portraits and personal mementos of her father, as if determined never to let that bond break. Her relationship with her mother, however, developed far more painfully. Stephanie could not look at her daughter without being reminded of Rudolph. When Stephanie remarried a Hungarian count in 1900, Erzi firmly rejected her stepfather. Mother and daughter drifted so far apart that all contact eventually ceased. The Mayerling tragedy not only robbed Erzi of her father, it lit a spark of defiance that would later define her entire life. Gisella's children choose their own paths. As the years passed, Gisella's children grew into young adults, and each surprised the family in their own way. The first to do so was Elisabeth Marie, who, at just 19, fell deeply in love with Otto Ludwig Philipp von Seefried Butenheim. For her father, Prince Leopold, the match was unthinkable. Otto was a Protestant from a lower rank of nobility. But Elisabeth Marie's resolve only hardened in the face of family opposition. She loved Otto and intended to spend her life with him. Far from Munich, the young couple hatched a daring plan. On November 2, 1893, they married secretly in Genoa. Their families learned of the wedding not in person, but through a letter. Prince Leopold felt deeply wounded, and a painful rift lasted for years. Gisela, however, stood protectively by her daughter, and with Emperor Franz Joseph's help, she worked patiently toward reconciliation. Eventually, even her grandfather accepted the union and supported the couple. What began as a forbidden love match blossomed into an exceptionally happy marriage that produced 5 children and lasted until Otto's death in 1951. Auguste took a far more conventional path. Her marriage to Archduke Joseph August of Austria fully met the expectations of the high nobility. The couple settled in Hungary and raised 6 children. But beneath Auguste's aristocratic exterior beat a deeply compassionate heart. The suffering of others never left her indifferent. When the First World War erupted, she did not hesitate. She volunteered as a nurse, cared for the wounded, organized relief efforts, and threw herself into charitable projects. Long after the monarchy had fallen, she remained true to her social calling, dedicating herself to the needy and homeless well into old age. Helping others remained the guiding purpose of her life. George at first seemed destined to follow the traditional path of a prince. He became an officer and in 1912 married his cousin, Archduchess Isabella of Austria, but the marriage crumbled within months, a rare and scandalous outcome for a Catholic prince of that era. After the First World War, George made a clean break with his past. He laid down his uniform, questioned everything about his former life, and chose a radically new direction. He studied theology and in 1921 was ordained a Catholic priest. From then on, he lived mostly in Rome, dedicating himself entirely to the service of the Church. It was a decision that few in his family had ever seen coming. The youngest sibling, Conrad, sought a quieter existence. In 1921, he married the Italian princess Bona Margherita of Savoy-Genoa, started a family, and had 2 children. After the end of the monarchy, he retreated almost entirely from public life. He returned to the world that had made him happiest as a child: nature. Among the mountains, forests, and estates of the Bavarian Alps, Conrad found the peace that had eluded him amid courtly splendor. Although he never fully abandoned hope for the monarchy's return, his true center became his family and the simple life in the countryside. The Red Archduchess, Erzi's transformation. Little Erzi had grown into a confident and striking young woman. Exceptionally tall, elegant, and possessed of an iron will, she knew exactly the sway she held over her grandfather the emperor and used it to her advantage. Perhaps the early loss of her father had sparked in her an unshakable desire to take charge of her own destiny. In the autumn of 1900, at a ball, she met Otto zu Windischgrätz, a dashing officer and celebrated equestrian. She fell head over heels in love and decided she would marry him, no matter what anyone else thought. Emperor Franz Joseph initially had other plans and wanted a more suitable match for his favorite granddaughter. But Erzi refused to yield. Day after day she fought for his approval until, at last, the emperor relented. On January 23, 1902, a grand wedding took place in the Vienna Hofburg. Otto was elevated to the rank of prince, and the Archduchess became Princess zu Windischgrätz. The couple went on to have 4 children, but the marital happiness quickly faded. The marriage broke down, and they went their separate ways. Ötzi lived an increasingly secluded life at Schönau Castle, where she grew close to naval officer Egon Lurch. His death in the First World War, lost with his submarine, devastated her. She repeatedly begged her grandfather to permit a divorce, but the emperor steadfastly refused. Once more, she collided with the rigid rules of the dynasty. Only after Franz Joseph's death and the collapse of the monarchy could Ötzi finally take action. What followed was a bitter, years-long custody battle for her 4 children. In 1921, the conflict reached a dramatic climax when a judge, a bailiff, and numerous police officers arrived at Schönau Castle with a court order to hand the children over to their father. But the handover never happened. Local residents formed a protective human wall in front of the castle, blocking the authorities' path, and the officials were forced to leave empty-handed. The children remained with their mother. Hardly any other granddaughter of an emperor ever received such a fierce show of solidarity from ordinary people. That same year, Ötzi met the social democratic politician Leopold Petzneck. Through him, she encountered men and women who struggled daily against hardship and poverty. She opened her castle garden to the needy, distributed fruit and vegetables to struggling families, and witnessed their plights firsthand. The experience changed her. Ötzi threw herself into the fight for social justice. In 1925, she took a step no one could have imagined of a crown prince's daughter. She joined the Social Democratic Workers' Party. The granddaughter of Emperor Franz Joseph became the Red Archduchess. Her bond with Petzneck deepened into a lifelong partnership, though they were unable to marry until 1948, after her first marriage was officially dissolved. Having survived the turmoil of the Second World War, they found each other again and remained inseparable until her death. Marie Valerie's full heart and heavy losses. For Marie Valerie, the youngest daughter of Sisi, a new and hopeful chapter began in 1886 when she met Archduke Franz Salvator of Austria-Tuscany at a ball. The two fell in love and married on July 31, 1890, in Bad Ischl. Though the celebrations still carried the shadow of Mayerling, the wedding marked the start of the happiest period of her life. Together, they had 10 children, and Walsee Castle hummed with life. Laughter echoed from the children's rooms, games filled the garden, and the family frequently staged little theatrical plays. Marie Valerie and Franz Salvator lavished time on their children, giving them exactly what she herself had so often missed at the Viennese court: a loving and, as far as possible, carefree childhood. Yet even this bustling household was not spared profound loss. In 1911, Marie Valerie had to cope with the death of her youngest daughter, Agnes, who died on the very day of her birth. A deeper wound came with the loss of her eldest son, Franz Karl. During the First World War, he served as an officer while the family at Walsee Castle waited anxiously for his return. When the monarchy collapsed in the autumn of 1918, Franz Karl finally came home, but the joy of reunion was heartbreakingly brief. The 25-year-old was gravely ill, and the family watched helplessly as his condition worsened. On December 10, 1918, he died of the Spanish flu. For Marie Valerie, the death of the son who was meant one day to inherit Walsee Castle was a blow from which she never fully recovered. She was plunged into deep grief. Franz Karl's brother Hubert Salvator stepped into the responsibility. Together with his wife Rosemary zu Samsam, he built a large family of 13 children, fulfilling his wish for a home alive with young voices. The many grandchildren brought renewed energy to Walsee Castle and gave Marie Valerie fresh strength in difficult times. Yet while her family flourished, her own marriage fell increasingly into crisis. Franz Salvator had relationships with other women and even acknowledged an illegitimate son. For the devoutly religious emperor's daughter, divorce was unthinkable. Instead, she poured all her energy into her children, her grandchildren, and her charitable work. On September 6, 1924, Marie Valerie died of lymphoma at only 56 years old. Her large family lost its heart and center. She left behind 10 children, 33 grandchildren, and numerous great-grandchildren. More tragedy followed. In 1930, her eldest daughter, Ella, died at only 38, leaving 4 children. Ella's younger sister Gertrude not only took over the care of those children but also meticulously preserved letters, diaries, and mementos belonging to both her mother and Emperor Franz Joseph. Thanks to her diligence, many intimate insights into Habsburg family life survive to this day. The other children also walked their own paths. Hedwig and Bernhard zu Stolberg raised 9 children. Theodor Salvator found personal happiness with Maria Theresa von Waldburg zu Ziel und Strachberg and raised a family. Maria died unmarried in 1936 at just 35, her story largely fading into silence. And after the Second World War, Mathilde married the Austrian lawyer Ernst Heffel and lived a secluded life in Salzburg without children. A family, an era, a farewell. The lives of Sisi's grandchildren could hardly have been more different. Some chose love over duty, others dedicated themselves to serving the vulnerable. Still others broke decisively with the expectations of their birth, charting courses that astonished their world. Behind the famous names were people of flesh and blood, full of hope, marked by deep loss, capable of remarkable courage. Their stories form the final, poignant chapter not only of an empress's legacy, but of an entire era.